2 years ago, someone's father wrote a book. It told the story of a man living in a world of cripples. This man, blessed with extraordinary powers, chose to help the weak and save lives. In the end, he brought peace to the world, but at the ultimate cost: his life. Our story begins in Wellston Private High School, specifically in the cafeteria. Today is special because the famous chocolate cake is being served. One lone slice of the legendary dessert sits unclaimed until two students start fighting over it. On one side, we have Remy. She tells Arlo to hand over the cake, since she saw it first. However, Arlo doesn't care. He coolly reminds Remy that it's his since he took it first. This answer only infuriates Remy, and she releases her powers. Electricity starts flowing through her body as she demands the cake back. Arlo doesn't hold back either and creates a barrier to block Remy's electricity. They both clash dramatically, and yes, all this over a slice of cake. Meanwhile, in the background, a boy nervously watches the scene unfold. At first glance, he seems concerned about the situation. But his real worry? Missing out on grabbing at least one slice of the cake. This boy is our protagonist, John. Right now, John is stuck in class, bored out of his mind like the rest of his classmates. His thoughts wander back to the chocolate cake he missed out in the cafeteria when he notices Remy enjoying her slice next to him. His daydreams are interrupted when the teacher asks for a volunteer to solve a problem. John raises his hand. Is he about to show off his skills? Nope. He just wants to go to the bathroom. This clearly annoys the teacher. But he still lets him go. Before leaving, a classmate mocks John, but one piece of chalk thrown by the teacher decides to intervene. Well done, sir. You have my respect. On his way to the bathroom, John starts noticing a soft rumble coming from the other side of the wall. Great is his surprise when he sees a red-haired guy piercing through the structure of the building. Despite the chaos, and with his life at risk, John asks the injured classmate if he's okay. The red-haired guy stands up as though nothing happened, and we can finally see who threw him through the wall. Ison, an orange-haired guy with a not-so-happy expression, is the culprit of this chaos. And what caused this clash? A fight over a pen. First a chocolate cake and now a pen. Why am I not surprised? Despite his injuries, the red-haired guy decides to fight back, charging energy between his hands and releases a powerful beam. At this point, the only thing John can do to preserve his life is run and find another way to the bathroom. Good call, John. Otherwise, the story would have ended right here. John's life might seem very ordinary at first glance, but there's one big problem. In a world where abilities mean everything, he was born without one. John finally escapes the chaos and finds what he thinks is a safe path to the bathroom, or so it seemed. Just outside the bathroom door, he comes across two students. One of them is bullying the other, throwing punches as the victim cowers. John hesitates for a moment, watching the scene unfold. Despite being powerless, he decides to step in before the situation escalates any further. With surprising courage, John pushes the bully back and firmly tells him to keep his hands to himself. The bully freezes, momentarily surprised. But then he looks at John, and his expression shifts completely when he realizes the school cripple was playing to be a hero. The sneer quickly turns into aggression as he lunges at John, ready to remind him of his place. The bully might be fast, but John is even faster. With a swift move, he deflects the bully's attack and counters with a perfectly aimed right jab to the bully's face. The force of the punch leaves the bully stunned. He clearly was not expecting this outcome. Then John notices something unsettling. A faint purple glow begins to emanate from the bully's body. His skin hardens, turning into stone, and his gaze becomes cold and menacing. John is unsure on how to handle this. He has already seen students nearly destroy each other over trivial things. But this is different. His life might actually be at risk. The bully starts rambling about the position a weakling with no abilities has in society, warning that if John keeps getting in others' way, he might end up dead. Meanwhile, we see the bully's victim has the ability to turn invisible. Without anyone noticing, he slips away from the scene. Not even a thanks? In a flash, the bully gets behind John and strikes with an elbow. Thankfully, John manages to block it with his arm. It seems the bully's ability isn't just about skin hardening. It's more of a self-enhancement power. The bully tries again to intimidate John, even demanding he beg for forgiveness. This only makes John laugh. The idea of begging someone so weak is a joke to him. He proceeds to list the names of the people he considers strong. Remy, Eason, Blake, the red-haired guy from earlier, and finally Serafina, a name we haven't heard in the story so far. This clearly infuriates the bully, but John doesn't flinch. He continues mocking the bully's ability, even says that without any power, he could easily defeat him. The bully charges at John, angered by his words. But John had been slowly moving toward the window. As the bully lunges, John swiftly grabs his arm, using his momentum to throw him out of the building. Once everything settles, John returns to his usual self, relieved and surprised that his mind games actually worked. His arm is broken and he'll need to visit the infirmary, but for some reason, that makes him more nervous than his earlier experience. John is now in the infirmary, and by the words of the doctor, he is a regular. Our protagonist looks more nervous than usual after hearing the doctor's words. Understandable. The doctor's attitude is very menacing, and he seems exhausted from dealing with John. At this point, he might even do more harm than good. The doc hands him a medicine to heal his arm. At least he's glad John pissed off only the stone guy and not one of the higher ranks of the school. Otherwise, not even the medicine would save him. John is about to leave, but one hand on his shoulder stops him. He won't go anywhere until the medicine takes effect. Meanwhile, on the rooftop of the school, a purple-haired girl is spending time chatting with someone. Her expression is very stoic until the person on the other side of the conversation asks her for help, which makes her smile slightly. Back in the infirmary, a girl shows up, annoying the doctor, thinking he has more work to do. She calls out to John, and we find out she's the same person from the rooftop earlier. Now, we learn two things. The purple-haired girl's name is Sarah, the same one John mentioned while mocking the stone guy, and she's been texting with John this whole time. John was going to stay at least 3 hours in the infirmary, and he was desperate to have some company. Sarah laughs and starts to leave for class, but John knows she never actually goes and begs her to stay. They spend time in the infirmary scrolling through their phones until John suddenly bursts out laughing like a maniac. Sarah asks him why he's acting like that. Wrong move, Sarah. This only makes John reveals the marvel contained on his phone. His score in Slappy Pig, but Sarah is not even impressed since her record is even higher. Suddenly, the whole school rumbles, cutting their free time short. We expect a sign of what's happening, but all we hear are the doctor's furious screams. He storms out of the room barking like an angry wolf. Apparently, another regular is causing a commotion somewhere else in the school. Before leaving, he warns John, "You better be here when I get back." John agrees, mentioning that he'll wait there with Sarah. The moment the doctor is out of sight, both of them decide to leave, completely disregarding his menacing words. Outside of the school, we encounter the rock boy again. His irritation hides any sign of pain. His mind is clouded with thoughts of revenge against John, and by sheer coincidence, he appears right in front of him. Coming out of his hideout, the rock boy grabs John by the shirt and looks ready to start another fight. Yep, this guy never learns. However, this time John isn't alone. When the rock boy notices Sarah standing with him, his fighting spirit vanishes. Sarah only needs to say a couple words to make the bully shake like jelly. He tries to act tough, but it's clear how shaken he really is. Sarah grows tired of his rambling and, without moving a muscle, throws the rock boy around like a rag doll. The force of the throw is so great that he slams into the wall and his ability starts to fade. Not tired of being beaten twice in a row, the bully tries to strike Sarah, but she dodges effortlessly, and with a soft hit behind the neck, Rock Boy falls unconscious. Sarah then leads the way out of the school as though nothing happened. She seems very used to dealing with people like him. We go back inside the school where the doctor is dragging Blake and Eisen. It seems the rumble was caused by a fight between the two of them. The doctor gives them a stern lecture about their behavior between classes. Despite this, they can't help but fight again over a stupid pen, which only annoys the doctor even more. Amidst all the chaos, the doctor notices someone missing from the infirmary. His expression makes it clear. It can only mean one person. Meanwhile, in a cafe, John narrates his life-risking experience of defeating the rock guy by throwing him out of the window. Sarah ends up laughing and mentions that living constantly on the edge must be fun. John's expression changes slightly. He just wants to have a peaceful life. He thinks that fighting over everything isn't the right way to live. Sarah disagrees, saying there's no point in proving yourself to someone weaker than you. John argues back, saying that the stronger aren't always right and using force to back up your point is pathetic. This statement unintentionally hits a nerve with Sarah. It was expected, After all, Sarah was born strong, and as a high tier, she has no real understanding of the life of those beneath her, especially John's. Suddenly, the news interrupts their conversation. It is mentioned that a group called Ember has left many victims on their way, and the last one was a vigilante. And apparently, that group's next destination is the city where John lives. Sarah breaks the silence, stating that those self-proclaimed heroes or vigilantes should mind their own business if they don't have the strength to back it up. On the other hand, John thinks they were just trying to help others. Let's take a step back, a year into the past, when John first transferred to Wellston Private High School. Countless sleepless nights, hours of studying, grueling exams. John did everything he could to get into Wellston, hoping that it could be different. A kind girl called Elaine approaches John trying to spark an innocent conversation between classmates. Everything flows smoothly until the word ability comes up. The room falls into an eerie silence. Everyone waits, eyes on John, eager to hear what the new guy's ability is. John tells the truth, feeling no reason to hide it, especially from someone who seems kind. But the moment the girl hears his answer, her mask falls off. Her true attitude surfaces. Disgust, pure and unfiltered, as she realizes she just wasted her time talking to a weakling. The rest of the class follows suit, hurling insults at him without hesitation. Outside the classroom, things don't get any better. Two guys pick on him, ready to show him his place. It's at that moment that John sees Sarah for the first time. Desperate, John calls out to her for help, clinging to the hope that someone might step in. But Sarah doesn't even glance his way. She walks past him without a care in the world. Reality hits John like a bucket of cold water. The flashback ends, and we find ourselves in John's bedroom. His peaceful sleep is rudely interrupted by a mysterious call, and he's not happy about it. Sarah is on the other side of the call. She wants John to join her on a trip to the mall. John tries to get out of it, mumbling something about needing to clean his house. But before he can hang up, there's a knock at the door. Sarah is already there. John opens the door and Sarah, all innocent, offers to help him clean. But as she steps inside, she notices something curious. Everything in the house is spotless. Except for one thing, a pair of fighting gloves sits on the floor. Sarah picks them up, and with that, their plans are set in motion. At the mall, John and Sarah spend their time searching and trying on some clothes. John is surprised at how quickly Sarah finishes her shopping. Soon after, they come across an ability gauge booth. For fun, John suggests Sarah to give it a try. Sarah initially scoffs at the idea, claiming those booths are a scam, but with a little convincing, she reluctantly agrees. At the booth, a girl shouting at the vendor. She is outraged because she can't believe her ability only got a power level of 4. She demands a refund, threatening the vendor to destroy everything if he refuses to do so. John grows tired of waiting in line and steps forward, asking the angry woman to calm down. His words, however, only fuel her fury. John stands firm, refusing to back down over a mere $10 refund. She's livid, her voice rising as she turns her threats toward John instead. The tension escalates and John tries to calm her, without success. Right when the woman is about to strike, John spots a security guard nearby and his attitude shifts completely. With a sense of security, he baits the woman into attacking him. Sarah smiles during the exchange, realizing what John is trying to do. The woman has had enough of John's taunts. She lunges forward, and at that very moment, John lets out a loud, dramatic scream for help, ensuring the guard takes notice. The guard intervenes immediately, grabbing the woman before she can land a blow. He demands an explanation. The woman pretends to be the victim. She points fingers at the ability booth vendor, blaming him for her rage. Without hesitation, the guard marches over to the vendor and orders him to refund her money. To John's frustration, the guard even threatens the vendor, giving him an ultimatum. This attitude annoys John. It's the same everywhere he goes. The strong always forces its way with bare force. Once the woman finally leaves, Sarah steps up to the ability gauge booth. The vendor seems nervous but processes her request. Moments later, the results appear. The vendor is surprised since Sarah got an ability level of 8, which means she is really strong. And as a reward, she receives a plush teddy bear. The vendor turns to John next, offering to measure his ability too. John waves it off, laughing nervously since he has no ability. The pair exits the mall, and the streets are already cloaked in darkness. John suggests taking a detour since the bus station is crowded and Sarah goes along with it. As they walk, Sarah teases John about his earlier antics. "I really thought you were going to start a fight back there," she says with a smirk. But the ending was anticlimactic, since he ended up screaming for help. John's thoughts are still wandering on the previous scene. The vendor was not wrong, but he ended up losing the money simply because he was weaker. Sarah tries to cheer him up, saying that at least he did not break his arm this time. Suddenly, John perceives a strange presence. His eyes dart around the dimly lit street, and without an explanation, he grabs Sarah and pulls her into a run. Sarah looks confused and doesn't understand why John is acting like that. They end up hiding in an alley. John reaches into one of their shopping bags. He pulls out a shirt and tosses it into the air. To their surprise, the shirt doesn't fall to the ground. It hovers, suspended in midair. "It's invisibility," John mutters, barely finishing his sentence before Sarah activates her power. The streets turn gray and time freezes. Moving forward with precision, she delivers a powerful kick to the space beneath the floating shirt before the world starts moving again. The guy flies away upon getting hit, and Sarah, looking noticeably drained, tells John to better get out of there. I wonder, where have we seen someone with an invisibility power? Outside of John's house, the streets are silent, shrouded in deep night, with no sound to be heard. John and Sarah return safely from the mall after their uncomfortable encounter with the invisible man. Sarah still can't wrap her head around what just happened. John dismisses it, suggesting it was probably someone trying to mug them, but he admits it was more than enough excitement for one day. Sarah watches John with a serious gaze, sensing something isn't quite right. Finally, she speaks, asking how he knew they were being followed. John waves it off, replying casually that it was just a gut feeling. Quickly changing the subject, he asks if she'd like to eat with him. Sarah declines the invitation, mentioning that it's pretty late and she should head back to her dorm. John reacts with alarm, clearly not expecting her to leave after what they had just experienced. Sarah remains stoic, assuring him that she can take care of herself. John reluctantly agrees, but insists she should stay the night, just in case. Sarah settles onto the sofa, her eyes falling on a lone book resting on the table. Its title reads, Unordinary, just like this manhwa. Ignoring John's questions from the kitchen, she picks up the book with quiet curiosity. John notices her holding it, a pinch of nervousness in his voice. Sarah asks how he managed to get his hands on a book that had been banned 2 years ago. John explains that his father gave him a copy since he had a few spares. Sarah reads the author's name on the cover and is surprised to learn that John's dad is the book's writer. She admits she's been interested in the book for a while, but since the ban, finding a copy has been nearly impossible. Curious, she wonders what made it so controversial that it vanished without a trace. John listens attentively, surprised at her level of interest in the topic. However, his expression darkens when she mentions rumors about the book being cursed, that readers, especially self-proclaimed superheroes, became delusional after reading it. John finally speaks, disagreeing with the notion that those superheroes were delusional. Instead, he argues, they understood the book's message. The world is flawed, and people should use their powers to bring balance and peace instead of serving selfish interests. With a faint smile, Sarah quips that he sounds like a vigilante. John finishes by inviting her to read it herself. Intrigued, Sarah decides to borrow the book. We find ourselves in an unknown location. A green screen displays a map with several marked positions. A mysterious voice asks for confirmation to mark the position of Target 93. Another voice approves the action. What could they be planning? Meanwhile, back at John's house, both Sarah and John are asleep in the living room, but John seems troubled. His sleep is plagued by nightmares. Dark voices taunt him, calling him weak and easy prey. He screams at them to stop, begging to be left alone. Suddenly, the darkness dissipates, and a green-haired girl appears, offering her help. John wakes up abruptly, drenched in sweat and visibly shaken. He stumbles to the bathroom, splashing water on his face in an attempt to calm himself. It was just a dream, he mutters, trying to convince himself. Still restless, he decides to go out for a walk, hoping the cool night air will help clear his mind. He leaves without waking Sarah. His walk takes him to a convenience store, where he buys a few sandwiches. As he eats, the image of the green-haired girl resurfaces in his mind. With a bitter expression, he decides it's best to head back home. At the apartment, Sarah wakes up just as John returns. She notices him entering from the street and immediately asks if he couldn't sleep because of a bad dream. John brushes off her question, casually mentioning that he brought breakfast. Sarah's suspicion grows. John, usually talkative, hasn't said much since he came back. Directly she asks, "Is everything all right?" John responds with a simple, "It's nothing." Sarah tries again, offering her support, but this time John snaps. He raises his voice, firmly stating that he's fine. That's all Sarah needs to hear. She rises from her seat and calmly tells him he needs some time alone. John tries to salvage the situation, but Sarah collects her shopping bags and leaves without another word, leaving John alone with his clouded thoughts. Outside, Sarah's phone buzzes. She glances at it and sees 37 unread messages waiting for her attention. It seems her phone had been in sleep mode. The scene shifts to the dormitories of Wellston School. A blue-haired girl notices Sarah entering the dorm and immediately approaches her. She looks both angry and worried, clearly upset that Sarah hasn't responded to her messages. Something about this girl feels familiar. The blue-haired girl scolds Sarah sternly for making her worry. What angers her even more, though, is the fact that Sarah was spending time with John. She starts yelling, questioning why someone of Sarah's status would ruin her image by associating with a cripple. Midway through her tirade, Sarah cuts her off. Now we learn that the girl's name is Elaine. Sarah activates her ability, freezing Elaine in place. With a calm but firm tone, Sarah reminds her that her choices and actions are none of Elaine's business. After heading to her room, time resumes, and Elaine collapses to the floor. Still dazed, Elaine receives a phone call asking if Sarah has returned. She confirms, though her frustration is evident. Back in her room, Sarah starts unpacking her shopping bags, including the teddy bear she won with John. Her phone buzzes. It's a message from John. He's apologizing for his behavior earlier and warning her to be cautious with the book. He reminds her it could cause serious trouble if anyone finds out she has it. Curious, Sarah opens the book and notices a handwritten note. "Dedicated to my son." Before she can process it further, a sudden knock on the door startles her. She quickly hides the book and opens the door to find a familiar face. Arlo greets her, attempting a compliment, but Sarah quickly sees through his words and dismisses him. Undeterred, Arlo reveals his purpose. He wants Sarah to join him for a turf war since they're short a member. Sarah refuses outright. As she's about to close the door, Arlo stops her by reminding her of her duties as the rightful queen of the school. She glares at him and asks why Remy isn't handling it. Arlo explains that Remy had to step away for a while due to family issues. He continues trying to persuade her, promising that she won't have to lift a finger. He assures her that he and the Jack will handle everything, so there's no need for concern. 6 hours later, we see Sarah, Arlo, Blake, and Elaine on a bullet train, heading toward their turf war. The Wellston team arrives at their destination, a barren, deserted area. Their opponents are 4 ability users from Agwin School. As the Wellston team approaches, the Agwin students notice them. Arlo greets them with his usual smug confidence. However, the king of Agwin interrupts him, pointing out that since Arlo organized the turf war, they shouldn't have arrived late. This remark catches Sarah's attention. She recalls Arlo telling her that Agwin challenged them, not the other way around. Her suspicions grow as the 2 kings step forward to meet in the middle of the arena. The king of Agwin questions why they were challenged, pointing out that Wellston has no reason to provoke them. Arlo smirks and reveals his true intentions. Agwin recently gained a new queen, and he wants to see her in action. The rules of the turf war are announced. It will be a series of one-on-one battles. The king of Agwin turns to Sarah, unfamiliar with her presence, and asks Arlo who she is. Arlo nonchalantly introduces her as a returning veteran named Serafina. Hearing her name, the king of Agwin freezes, vivid memories of the past flooding his mind. He remembers Serafina as the unstoppable force who single-handedly took down his entire team in the past. While the Agwin king is lost in thought, Arlo seizes the moment to officially start the turf war. The jacks from both schools step forward, ready to begin the first match. Agwin's jack lunges at Blake with impressive speed. Blake steps back, keeping his distance and launching energy balls to hinder his opponent's movements. Agwin's jack expertly evades by leaping into the air, aiming to close the gap. As he descends, Blake uses his energy beams to propel himself backward, narrowly avoiding the strike. Amid the debris, Blake fires a powerful energy beam at his rival. Agwin's jack jumps to avoid the attack, but sustains an injury to his leg in the process. The Agwin king takes notice of the injury, and Blake, now irritated, presses the advantage. Agwin's jack, realizing he needs to get close to stand a chance, hurls a rock at Blake. Blake destroys the rock midair with his energy balls, creating a thick cloud of dust. With visibility obscured, Blake seizes the moment. He appears beside his rival in a flash, charging an energy beam. The injured jack knows he can't avoid the attack and braces for the worst. Just before Blake fires, the king of Agwin calls off the fight. Recognizing the futility of continuing, he declares their loss. Though humiliated, Agwin's jack reluctantly accepts his leader's decision. The Queen of Agwin then steps forward confidently, announcing that she will handle the rest of the battle herself. Blake is declared the winner of the first encounter, but the battle is far from over. Agwin's queen steps forward, ready for the next match. As the fight begins, Blake launches a series of energy balls toward her, each one hitting its mark and kicking up a dense cloud of dust. When the dust settles, the queen's ability is revealed, a pair of spider-like claws protruding from her back, shielding her from the attack. Without hesitation, the claws lash out toward Blake. He skillfully evades, propelling himself with energy beams to maintain his distance. Despite his efforts, the relentless claws keep attacking, leaving him unable to approach. Frustrated, Blake attempts to maneuver closer, but two of the claws strike him directly, slashing deep wounds into his chest and leg. The queen smirks as a third and fourth claw emerge from her back, joining the fray. She launches a synchronized attack with all four claws. Blake narrowly evades using a burst of energy to propel himself away. Finally, he closes the gap and prepares to counterattack. But just as he's about to unleash his power, a fifth claw pierces his side, halting his momentum. The queen uses her claws to hurl Blake across the battlefield, sending him tumbling to the ground. From the sidelines, Sarah glances at Arlo, wondering why he hasn't stopped the fight yet. Blake struggles to his feet. Despite his injuries, he tries to act tough and asks the girl, how many claws does she actually have? The queen dismisses his question with a bored expression and mentions that he probably won't be called back by his team until he gets knocked down. Growing impatient, the queen decides to end it. With all 5 claws, she launches a final, devastating attack. Just as the claws are about to strike, Sarah steps in and stops the fight. She declares the match over, handing the victory to Agwin School. Sarah turns to Elaine, instructing her to tend to Blake's injuries. She's been absent from turf wars for only 1 semester, and she can't believe Arlo has been managing them this way. She moves to step into the next battle, but Arlo blocks her path. With a confident smirk, he says, Blake and I are going to take care of this. Just sit back and watch. Agwin's king congratulates the queen but warns her not to let her guard down. He reminds her that Wellston is ranked #1 in turf wars, having never lost a fight. Agwin's queen tells him not to worry, saying she won't play anymore. The next match begins, this time between Wellston's king and Agwin's queen. The girl releases her 8 spider claws at once, launching them at Arlo. He remains still, creating a barrier to block the attack. The queen notices Arlo's strategy and decides to change her tactics. Using 4 of her claws, she leaps into the air, searching for a weak point before attacking again. Arlo blocks her effortlessly, not even breaking a sweat. The queen begins to notice cuts appearing all over her body. Arlo's barriers seem to deflect damage. She tries to increase the distance, launching more attacks, but Arlo steadily walks toward her, blocking every move. The injuries on her body continue to multiply, and she starts retreating. As she tries to back away, she discovers a barrier blocking her path. Arlo creates a cage-like barrier around her, trapping the queen like a spider in a glass. Every attempt she makes to escape results in more cuts. Arlo steps into the barrier, and she attacks again, but her claws are immediately blocked. Desperation takes over as she struggles to find a way to defeat him. Standing directly in front of her, Arlo calls her a disappointment. He mocks her, saying he'd heard so many good things about her but sees nothing special. Enraged, Agwin's queen tries to slap him, but she misses. Arlo grabs her hand and begins choking her. Agwin's king calls out to his queen, admitting defeat in the match. However, Arlo doesn't release her and continues mocking her attacks as weak. Agwin's king grows desperate, pleading for Arlo to stop, but he doesn't. Unable to watch any longer, Agwin's jack rushes at Arlo, only to be immediately stopped by another barrier and end up full of scars. Arlo smiles at Agwin's king, knowing there's nothing they can do to save their teammate. But then, Sarah steps in and commands Arlo to stop. Arlo gazes at Sarah, thinking he won't take orders from someone who just returned to action. He tightens his grip on Agwin's queen. Sarah has seen enough. She activates her power. Elaine notices and tries to stop her, but time freezes before she can finish. Sarah rushes toward Arlo's barrier. With a powerful punch, she pierces through it. The attack reflects back, causing cuts to appear all over her arm. However, Sarah has another technique. She rewinds time, and her arm heals instantly. Arlo feels the pain from his barrier being pierced and releases Agwin's queen. Furious, he yells at Sarah, demanding to know what she was thinking, attacking her own teammate. Agwin's king lets out a soft laugh. He's never seen members of the same team fight each other. Sarah approaches Agwin's king and gives him two options. He can forfeit and accept his loss, or he can continue fighting, with her as his opponent. Agwin's king knows there's no point in continuing. He concedes defeat. On the way back to Wellston dorms, Elaine tends to Arlo, healing the damage caused by Sarah. Arlo asks Elaine why Serafina has been acting so strangely. Elaine admits she doesn't know. Nothing she says seems to get through to her anymore. Frustrated, Arlo asks what the point is of having Sarah as her roommate if she can't keep an eye on her. Elaine finally speaks. It's all because of John, she says. She explains that Serafina used to focus on being perfect until she started hanging out with John. Now, Sarah is completely different from the person everyone once idolized. Elaine adds that Sarah even stayed at John's place last night, which intrigues Arlo. He tells Elaine to keep a close eye on Sarah and report anything suspicious. As for John, Arlo plans to deal with him personally. John walks down the street when the news catches his attention. Another victim has been found, marked with the Ember logo. The victim, a vigilante, was found in the South Wellston area. John notices that the attacks are getting closer and closer. The news continues, revealing that those killed by Ember were known as high-tier vigilantes. They then show public opinions about the fallen vigilantes. Most people consider them lunatics who cause trouble and are just waiting to be killed. John keeps walking, ignoring the news. Back at Wellston, Blake is calmly heading to class when Ison sneaks up on him, giving him the scare of his life. Ison laughs upon seeing the scars all over Blake's face and asks if he got beaten up in the turf war. Blake retorts, saying at least he's strong enough to be in one. Ison responds, claiming he could be in a turf war too, but he's not into that stuff. Okay, dude, whatever you say. Blake mentions that Serafina was at the last turf war, which surprises Ison. Ison asks what happened, and Blake tells him that Serafina actually attacked Arlo. However, Blake stops mid-sentence, realizing he's not supposed to talk about it. Ison, sensing Blake is hiding something, says he'll feel better if he confesses and promises to keep it a secret. Meanwhile, John has returned to school, stressed, because he forgot he had a history exam. He bumps into Arlo in the aisle, still distracted. John apologizes, apparently unaware that Arlo is the king of Wellston. Arlo's classmate grabs John, demanding a proper apology. John, confused, wonders what the guy wants from him. Maybe he wants an apology too. He asks to be let go, explaining he has a test in 10 minutes. Arlo intervenes, telling his classmate to let John go. Arlo wishes John good luck on his exam, and John hurries off. Why do I feel like Arlo is about to do something? Arlo's classmate reminds him that John is the cripple Arlo was looking for. However, Arlo simply asks if his classmate noticed anything odd about John, to which the classmate denies. Arlo continues, asking what he would do if he were a weakling and bumped into the king. The classmate responds that, of course, he would be careful to avoid getting beaten up. Arlo thinks exactly the same. However, when John bumped into him, there was no sign of fear in his eyes. This attitude sparks a sense of curiosity in Arlo towards John. Meanwhile, on the school's rooftop, Sarah sits playing a game on her phone. Upon reading the word perfect, we dive into her memories. For as long as she can remember, she was taught to be perfect. Phrases like, "You are not like the others," "You were born gifted," and "You will rise above your peers" were constantly drilled into her. She had to be stronger and smarter than everyone else. She had to be perfect. But when perfection becomes an expectation, it's no longer an achievement. Sarah stopped living for herself. Her only role was to be perfect. We return to John and Sarah's first encounter. John, backed up against a wall, listens to his two bullies lecture him about hierarchy in Wellston until he notices Sarah. In his desperation, John calls out to her for help. The bullies laugh at him for not understanding his place. A weakling like him should never speak to the queen. One of the bullies gets frustrated by John's defiance and throws a punch. However, John manages to dodge it. At that moment, needles fired by the other bullies start hitting John. Sarah watches the scene unfold, and even she thinks two bullies against a cripple is overkill. Despite being a cripple, John avoids the bullies' punches and manages to land a knee to his stomach. John then uses the other bully's surprise to charge at him. He grabs him and tries to apply a hold, thinking he has a hostage to stop the other bully. But the other bully doesn't care and charges at John again. John, realizing his strategy failed, pushes his hostage toward the other bully and makes a run for it. As he's about to leave, John and Sarah lock eyes. John thanks her for not lifting a finger. Sarah is lost in her thoughts, still remembering the encounter with the cripple. The teacher calls her to collect her test, snapping her back into reality. A perfect score, as always. Her classmates voice their opinions aloud, saying that everything is too easy for her. However, they don't know that Sarah worked hard to be in this position. She walks down the aisle, hearing the expectations of other students, but they fall silent the moment they see her. In another aisle, two students mention that today they're serving the famous chocolate cake, and John can't wait to have a taste of it. In the cafeteria, John happily walks with a slice of chocolate cake in his hands. However, someone calls out to him. When he turns around, he sees Sarah again, but this time she's asking him to give her the slice of cake. John immediately refuses to follow the order. He doesn't care if she's the queen or whatever. He earned that slice and it belongs to him. Sarah extends her hand, her voice sharp as she threatens John, telling him not to make her repeat herself. John feels the weight of her presence. Nervously, he moves the cake toward her hand, but in his shaking state, he ends up dropping the cake. Sarah freezes for a second, trying to process what just happened. Her fury begins to boil, and she loses awareness of her surroundings. In a flash, she activates her powers and strikes John, sending him flying into a wall. She approaches him and gets down to his level. Snapping, she yells at him, complaining about how a cripple dares to humiliate her, someone who works hard every day. Her frustration keeps building. She slaps John, trying to understand how someone so weak acts as though he owns the place without understanding his position. At the end, it's not about the cake. She's angry because someone like John has more freedom than her. We return to the present, where Sarah is chatting with John about his failed exam. Serafina leaves the rooftop and hears the rumors about her fight with Arlo during the last turf war. It seems that Ison can't keep his mouth shut. Sarah continues to hear comments about her lack of respect for the rules and her appearance. But when the students notice her, the whole aisle falls into silence, and a smile creeps onto her face. For the first time, she feels truly happy, finally free from everyone's expectations. We are now at John's place. It seems that John was working out until somebody calls him. It ends up being his dad. Upon answering the call, his dad asks him how everything is going. You know, dad stuff. However, he also warns him to be careful since a group called Amber is causing trouble around his area. His dad really means it and tells John not to do anything stupid. I wonder what he means by that. The call ends faster than expected since John's dad's editor is calling him. At the Wellston dormitories, we see Sarah reading Unordinary, the book John lent her. She closes it and leaves it on the bed before heading out for a walk. When she's about to leave, she meets Elaine. Elaine cheerfully offers her a glass of orange juice made with fruit from her family's farm. Sarah accepts the offer, but says she'll have it later since she's about to leave. Sarah walks down the street thinking about the book's contents. It's a story about a man who protects a world full of cripples. How did someone come up with that premise? She wonders. She thinks John's father wrote the book to share his idea of a world where John could stand as everyone's equal. She recognizes that many people agree with that vision. That's why so many self-proclaimed heroes appeared, trying to emulate the hero of the book. It's no surprise the authorities banned the book since it goes against the structure of the current society. They feared how it inspired many high tiers to take action after reading it. But the world of the book and the real world share something in common. Only strong people have the power to influence reality. Back in Sarah's bedroom, we see Elaine leaving a glass of orange juice on Sarah's desk. As she turns to leave, she notices the book resting on the bed. Sarah returns from her walk and notices the orange juice on her table. She also notices the book on her bed and realizes she really messed up. On the other side of the bedroom, Elaine is researching the book. She finds a wiki about it and learns that the book is the reason so many vigilantes and self-proclaimed heroes started to appear. She continues her research and discovers several news articles about those superheroes being murdered. She gets frustrated because she doesn't know what to do and is scared that Serafina wants to become a vigilante. Elaine decides to call Arlo. Arlo picks up the phone and Elaine tells him that Serafina is in big trouble. She explains that Sarah has a book called Unordinary and insists it can only mean bad news. Arlo tells her to calm down and stay focused. For now, he says it's better if no one else finds out about this. Back on the rooftop, John is talking to Sarah about his report card. From his attitude, we can infer that he failed almost everything. Sarah tells him not to freak out since there's nothing he can do about it. She then uses the moment to tell John that she cannot give him back the book. John immediately guesses that it must be because Elaine found it. From Sarah's expression, John realizes he's right. He reprimands her for being so careless and reminds her that, even with her ability, she can't rewind this mistake. John asks her what her plan is, and she replies that she'll keep the book for a while so no one can trace it back to him. Sarah tells John not to worry. Since she's the school's ace, she believes they will be lenient with her. John then asks her what she thought about the book. Sarah tells him that its content was absurd. However, she admits that some points are not fully clear to her and asks John for help. John starts by saying that he admires the hero of Unordinary because he listened to others and saw value in everyone. He continues, explaining that the core idea is that even the weakest people can have amazing ideas and they should be protected. With a proud light in his eyes, he says that if he were qualified, he would join the people trying to make that vision a reality. Sarah gazes at him and apologizes for the book, saying she didn't know it meant so much to him. John tells her it's okay since he has read it many times and needed a break from it anyway. In the library of the school, we find Blake reading a book. Everything is quiet until someone drops a mountain of books on the table. It's Remy, and she's upset about the number of exams she has to take at the end of the quarter. Blake is surprised. He didn't know Remy came back last night. Remy asks Blake to tell her if anything interesting happened last week. Blake mentions that they won a turf war, and he also adds that Sarah even substituted her as the queen. Blake is about to share something only royals should know. However, Remy interrupts him, saying everyone already knows that Sarah kicked Arlo's butt in the turf war. Remy is relieved that those two finally fought it out. However, she knows it's none of her business, despite Blake saying otherwise. Remy understands that her position as the queen is only because Sarah doesn't want it. She's aware that her level is far below theirs, and trying to stop them would probably get her killed. Blake then asks Remy why she left so suddenly. Remy's attitude changes and pain fills her eyes. She finally reveals she attended a funeral. Her brother was murdered. Meanwhile, we see John in his classroom. He looks really thoughtful. He starts remembering some kids laughing in front of him. A younger John, beaten and bruised, glares at them with fury. A hand extends toward him, offering help. It's the green-haired girl again. Suddenly, the teacher's voice snaps John back to reality. He stands up and collects his grade report, and it's not as bad as he was expecting. Elsewhere, Arlo is walking down one of the school aisles. He's surprised that Sarah managed to get a copy of Unordinary. He wonders if her recent behavior is influenced by the book. Suddenly, John bumps into Arlo, scattering all his papers. Arlo bends down to help him collect them, and the people around start murmuring. But when Arlo raises his voice, everyone goes silent. As Arlo leaves, he tells John to be more careful next time. However, his expression changes as he leaves, revealing that he's actually planning something. Now we find Arlo and Eason in an empty classroom. Eason is wondering why Arlo called for him. Arlo tells him that his expertise is needed and asks if he's able to find information on anyone. Eason asks what exactly Arlo is looking for. Arlo inquires if Eason knows John, who is in his grade. Eason affirms but wonders why Arlo is interested in that cripple. Arlo tells him that John looks suspicious after seeing him a couple of times. He's powerless, completely unaware of his surroundings, and has no respect for hierarchy. However, he got into Wellston and hangs out with Sarah. Arlo thinks those facts don't line up and asks Eason to find his story and what he did to get into Wellston. Eason tries to persuade Arlo to just forget about him. However, Arlo tells him he didn't ask for his opinion. Eason shakes a little and accepts the order. Before Eason leaves, Arlo reminds him to keep his mouth shut this time. Meanwhile, John is walking and notices a paper on the billboard. It's a death pool where students bet on which superhero will die next. This infuriates John, and he tears it off. With the paper in his hands, he wonders what kind of people would do that. Suddenly, he notices a bully stepping on another student's papers. The bully laughs, rejoicing in the panic of the victim. Out of nowhere, John launches a jab, throwing the bully to the floor. He lowers himself to the bully's level and starts lecturing him. John calls him a disgrace to society for stepping on people weaker than him. The bully only laughs and prepares to attack. He shoots a laser at John, but John doesn't flinch and avoids the attack. John has had enough and starts beating the bully. However, upon seeing the bully's face full of wounds, John's memory flashes back. He sees a blonde guy covered in scars. This makes him stop, and he decides to run away. The bully seizes the opportunity and starts threatening John, acting as though John is escaping from him. In the distance, Eason watches the scene carefully. Elsewhere in the school, we see Remy holding the death pool. Tears fall from her face as she uses her electricity to burn the paper. As she walks away, one piece of the burned paper shows the name X-Static. This vigilante was murdered recently and is probably Remy's brother. Remy is now knocking on Sarah's dorm. Elaine opens the door, and Remy tells her she wants to talk with Serafina. Elaine lets her in and offers some tea, but Remy refuses, saying the visit will be quick. Sarah is in her room, reading a magazine, when she hears Remy knocking on the door. Remy walks in and notices the teddy bear. However, she also spots a circuit inside of it. Immediately, Remy apologizes to Sarah and thanks her for substituting as queen during her absence. Sarah tells her not to worry, saying she owed it to her. After all, Remy had taken the burden of being queen off her shoulders. Remy keeps glancing at the bear, enough that Sarah asks why she's staring so much. Remy points out the chip inside the bear, saying it's giving her bad vibes. Curious, they open the bear and examine the circuit. It turns out to be a tracking device. This makes Sarah remember the moment she won the bear. She begins to wonder if all the prizes from the level gauge booth contained trackers. Her mind races back to the booth sign, which mentioned that anyone with an ability level of 5+ would receive a prize. She deduces that someone is tracking high tiers. Remy advises Sarah to stay alert from now on. Even though they're strong, they're far from invincible. Meanwhile, back at school, Eason is trying to process all the information he's gathered about John so far. He's spoken with bullies who had encounters with him, including Rockboy, and the pair who gave John his welcome to Wellston. He even tried asking the school doctor, but apparently the doctor didn't know any John. All the information points to John being just a typical cripple. Yet Eason can't shake what he saw during the confrontation with the bully. John didn't act like a typical cripple in a fight. He showed confidence. Frustrated by the lack of answers, Eason decides to talk directly to John. John is surprised to see Eason talking to a cripple like him. Eason mentions that the school newspaper wants to write an article about the life of a cripple and needs John's input to make it accurate. John shrugs and accepts, but says maybe later. His class is about to start. Eason, thinking John is joking, presses on, saying that the interview can't wait. Eason takes John into a classroom and invites him to take a seat. John emphasizes that he was practically dragged there against his will. Ignoring the comment, Eason insists he sit. Eason explains that he's writing the article to bring attention to the struggles of low tiers and urges John to speak with full honesty, holding nothing back. John is surprised and happy at the comment, unaware of Eason's true intentions. The interview begins with Eisen asking where John is from. John replies, New Boston, surprising Eisen since it's quite far from the school. Eisen then asks if that's where he went before transferring, but John corrects him, saying he was homeschooled and Wellston is his first real school. So, what made you switch? Eisen asks. John explains that he was curious to see what a real school was like, but his dad had been a bit protective of him, which delayed his chance until now. Eisen continues, asking how his experience at the school has been so far. John responds that it's been pretty bad, to say the least. When prompted to elaborate, John states that low tiers have no rights and must stay alert at all times since everywhere is a danger zone. John is surprised by how much Eisen is writing but doesn't realize that Eisen is actually doodling a silly scene of himself defeating Blake and impressing Remy. Eisen proceeds to ask how John manages to survive in such an environment. When John begins to answer, Eisen cuts him off, asking him to focus specifically on his own actions. John explains that he tries to walk on the edges of the hallways and stay quiet to avoid drawing attention to himself, though Eisen suspects he's lying. John eventually says the article should emphasize the importance of accepting people's differences. However, Eisen abruptly stands up, cutting John's speech short. Eisen reminds John that he still has many questions left to ask. He asks how John chose Wellston as his school. John replies that Wellston has one of the best academic programs in the nation. Feeling uneasy, John notices that the interview has shifted into more of an interrogation. Eisen comments that Wellston is also renowned for its high-tier abilities, making it a risky choice for a cripple like John. John admits that he assumed academics would be more valued than fighting, but Eisen dismisses this as short-sighted, although expected from someone inexperienced in such environments. Eisen then brings up John's father, striking a nerve. He asks if John's dad ever warned him about the challenges of the school. Eisen continues, suggesting that attending a closer school might have been a better first step instead of jumping into Wellston. He speculates that perhaps John's father had already tried that, but for some reason it didn't work out. John finally snaps. Grabbing Eisen by the shirt, he demands that he stop prying into his life. John reminds him that the purpose of the interview was to discuss his struggles as a low tier, not to be interrogated. With surprising strength, Eisen grabs John's arm and calmly remarks that John is very lucky to have Serafina on his side. Effortlessly, he removes John's hand from his shirt. Picking up his folder, Eisen thanks John for the information before leaving the empty classroom. It seems Eisen now plans to dig into John's past in New Boston. We find Eisen scrolling through pictures from New Boston High School. Suddenly, he spots John's picture among the files. Eisen abruptly stands from his chair, making a lot of noise and drawing attention. Blake, annoyed, tells him to keep it down to avoid getting kicked out of the library. Ignoring the comment, Eisen excitedly calls Blake over to show him his discovery. He points at John in the picture, but Blake looks confused, not even recognizing who John is. While Eisen keeps praising himself for uncovering something significant, Blake wonders why he should care about John. Frustrated, Blake asks why Eisen is stalking John. At this, Eisen suddenly remembers Arlo's strict warning to keep quiet. Snapping out of it, Eisen dismisses Blake's question with a curt, "That's none of your business," which irritates Blake further. Blake, who wasn't even interested at first, now feels insulted at being dragged into the matter, only to be dismissed. Later, Arlo and Eisen finally meet after some time apart. Arlo remarks that Eisen better have some valuable information after all this time. Confidently, Eisen takes out a file and begins his report. He explains that he's been observing John's behavior for several days, and John himself admitted that he was homeschooled and had no ability. Eisen notes that when John was asked about low tiers, he avoided speaking about himself, and his answers didn't align with his actual behavior. Initially, Eisen thought John was just clueless and acted that way out of ignorance. But when the topic of his past came up, John became extremely defensive and even attacked him. Eisen then presents Arlo with a picture of John and his class from 2 years ago. Arlo is surprised, remarking how unrecognizable John looks compared to now. Eisen continues, pointing out that John doesn't care if he bumps into someone and talks to high tiers without hesitation. He adds that if it weren't for John's claim of being a cripple, he would assume John had some kind of ability. Arlo listens intently, then surprises Eisen by tearing up the file he had just handed over. When Eisen offers to continue researching, Arlo stops him saying that he's done enough, and from that point he'll take care of John. Meanwhile, back at the Wellston dormitories, Elaine is doing some homework when her phone buzzes. She checks it and finds a new message from Arlo. Elaine seems happy as she picks up her phone, likely feeling something for Arlo. However, her expression darkens when Arlo asks her to inform the headmaster about what she found regarding Serafina. Later, over the school speaker, Sarah is called to the headmaster's office. Elaine waits outside the office, worried about what she's just done. Suddenly, the door opens, and Sarah appears, surprising Elaine. Sarah looks at her, but Elaine quickly avoids her gaze, feeling ashamed. Inside the office, Sarah is greeted by the headmaster, who invites her to sit. He asks her to relax, noting that even he's starting to feel nervous. Next, he introduces a woman present on behalf of the authorities. The headmaster tells Sarah that the woman is there to ask her a few simple questions. The interrogation begins, with the woman stressing that Sarah must be completely honest since any lie will be detected and could result in her expulsion from Wellston. The woman asks if Sarah has a book called Unordinary, to which Sarah replies affirmatively. "How long have you had the book?" the woman asks. Sarah answers that it's been about 12 days. Things begin to feel more serious as the woman asks how Sarah got the book. Sarah becomes nervous, not wanting to involve John. She starts analyzing the woman's power, and from her expression, she deduces that it must only be a lie detection ability, so her thoughts are safe. The woman, growing impatient, demands an answer. Sarah finally speaks, explaining that after leaving the mall, she felt like she was being followed by an invisible entity. After confronting it, she ran off with all her might. When she returned to her dormitory, the book was already in one of her shopping bags. The woman has been using her power while Sarah spoke and didn't detect any lies. She continues, asking if Sarah was with anyone when the incident happened. This question shakes Sarah once again. Before she can answer, the headmaster intervenes, stating that they should focus only on asking relevant questions, as their students' time is valuable. The woman presses on, asking where the book is now. Sarah responds that she destroyed it. "Did you read it?" the woman asks. Sarah answers yes. Finally, the woman asks what Sarah thought of the contents of the book. Sarah replies, saying that the message of the book was absurd. The woman seems relieved upon hearing that. She tells Sarah she can leave since she still needs to talk with the headmaster. Meanwhile, John is in class when his phone buzzes. It's a message from Sarah, asking him to meet her at the school gates. John rushes out and meets Sarah, who's carrying luggage. She explains that she was ratted out by Elaine and will have to leave the school for a month, heading back home. It seems the authorities were worried about the recent deaths of high tiers and wanted to ensure the book hadn't influenced her in any way. Sarah adds that John shouldn't worry because she managed to hide any trace of him from the lie detection woman. However, John scolds her for not taking the situation seriously. He tells her she should have told the truth, since the book was his. Sarah reassures him, saying the only thing that matters is that they both got through it relatively unscathed. John relaxes a little and ends up agreeing with Sarah. Sarah finally leaves, promising to text him once she gets home. John heads back into the school, unaware that Arlo is watching him with a menacing gaze. As John walks through the school, a familiar voice catches his attention. It's Rockboy again, still angry about their last encounter and eager to finish what he started with John. "Dude, you should really go to therapy or something." John rushes off, shouting that he's been mistaken for someone else. Rockboy chases him at full speed, while John tells him he shouldn't keep dwelling on the past and should just move on with his life. But John doesn't notice where he's heading, and soon finds himself at a dead end. Rockboy takes advantage of this, launching a powerful kick toward him. John manages to evade the kick, using the opportunity to push the bully and send him crashing to the ground. To make sure Rockboy stays down, John throws his notebooks at him before running off. John is running with all his might, knowing that if Rockboy catches up, he stands no chance. But in that moment, Rockboy leaps at him and grabs him from behind. Using his weight, Rockboy forces John to the ground and pins him there. With Sarah no longer around, Rockboy seizes the moment to take his revenge. In the infirmary, the doctor is surprised to see John back so soon. The doctor laughs, mentioning that it hasn't even been 4 hours yet, and John already has a black eye and a broken arm. He adds that he's in such a good mood because he had made a bet with another teacher about how long it would take John to break something, and he won. However, the doctor jokes that if John had taken longer, he would have strangled him himself. John rests on one of the infirmary beds, his phone buzzing beside him. He checks the screen. It's a message from Sarah. She tells him she just got off the plane, which brings a smile to his wounded face. After a while, John checks his arm and notices that it's completely healed. He compliments the doctor's tonics, saying they're getting better each time. With a menacing tone, the doctor thanks John for making him practice preparing the tonics every single day. John leaves the infirmary, his arm healed, but as he walks through the hall, three guys notice him. They start eyeing him with ill intentions. One of them, a purple-haired guy, shoves John against a wall, mocking his previously wounded appearance. The purple-haired guy mentions that there's a rumor going around school saying that Serafina has been suspended for a month. He then asks John to help them with target practice after school, since John clearly has nothing better to do. John notices a dark aura lurking just around the corner, and his attitude shifts immediately. He mocks the three guys, calling them weaklings who won't even be able to land a single hit on him. Irritated, the purple-haired guy demands that John watch his words. John, not caring, simply replies that the guy's breath reeks. Suddenly, a hand grabs the purple-haired bully, making him nervous. The doctor appears, threatening the bullies, mentioning that he has a date tonight. He warns them that if anyone makes him work overtime, he'll take care of them personally. John starts laughing softly, but the doctor's irritation grows. He adds that his threat applies to John as well. Finally, the doctor leaves, threatening them once more and saying he'll keep an eye on them. Once the doctor is out of sight, the purple-haired bully resumes his actions, calling John lucky for being saved by the doctor. He tells John that a cripple like him is nothing but a leech, feeding off others. The bullies finally leave, but John stands still, reflecting on what he just said. The words, "a leech who feeds off others," linger in his mind, making him think of the green-haired girl from his past. A dark expression settles on John's face as memories resurface. The scene shifts to Serafina's house. Upon arriving, Sarah greets her mother. Her mother simply calls her name from upstairs. In a flash, her mother comes down from the second floor and immediately slaps Sarah. It seems her mother possesses some sort of time manipulation ability as well. She scolds Sarah, warning that if she keeps becoming more reckless, she'll end up as the failure her older sister was. Her mother orders her to remove her extensions and says they'll discuss a proper punishment when she gets back. Sarah stays still, her cheek swelling from the slap as she hears her mother leave. Sarah is now in her room, using her laptop. Her phone buzzes, and upon checking, she sees a message from John asking if she has time to talk. John calls her, but when she picks up, he answers with an unusual "hi." Sarah mentions that he sounds weird. John explains that he was just surprised to hear her voice since it's been a while. Sarah jokes, asking if John already misses her. He laughs and replies that he just had a long day. Sarah starts helping John with some school assignments. She calls them easy, but John replies that they have very different definitions of easy. John asks how everything is going, assuming she's having a great time with her family. She stoically responds that it's almost the same since her parents left for a business trip. She's practically alone, playing video games all day. Sarah tells John she found a new game, but he better hurry with his homework so they can play together. John says he's just getting the hang of Slappy Pig, but Sarah replies it's a much easier game called Angry Pigs. She describes the game, which is similar to Angry Birds but with reversed roles. Instead of attacking pigs, the pigs attack the player, who must defend the birds by building structures. John ends up confused, unsure if the game is for him. They play together, but every one of John's attempts ends in a game over, which drives him crazy. He refuses to give up, but Sarah reminds him that he has school tomorrow, and it's already 2 a.m. The next day, John is walking through the school aisle, looking at his chat with Sarah on his phone. Suddenly, a hand stops him midway. It's Arlo, but he's not there to pick a fight. Instead, he reminds John to watch where he's walking. John simply replies with a sorry. Arlo is surprised since John doesn't seem affected. Then, he notices John's phone and the conversation with Sarah. They continue on their way. However, Arlo doesn't want John to keep talking to Sarah and plans to do something with John's phone. John is now being beaten up by a couple of bullies. They feel underwhelmed, expecting at least some resistance from him. After getting bored, they simply leave. In the infirmary, the doctor lists John's broken bones, surprised since John has broken his record. John responds, saying that this time he didn't start any fight. The bullies just appeared and attacked him, but the doctor cuts him off. He says he's tired and that by now, John should know how to avoid these situations. John tries to grab his phone, remembering that he hasn't texted Sarah yet. However, when he checks, he sees that his phone is completely broken. On the other side of the infirmary, the doctor is talking to Layla, the woman he had a date with. Suddenly, the doctor hears a crash and hangs up the phone. John has just smashed his phone against the floor, breaking it even more. He looks pissed and deduces that the bullies actually went after his phone. John gets ready to leave, but a hand holds his shoulder. The doctor tries to stop him, but John aggressively shakes him off. The doctor gets really angry, but before he can say anything, John speaks up. He says he didn't enroll at Wellston to spend all day in the infirmary. John is about to leave, but the doctor threatens him, telling him not to take one more step. The doctor asks what the point of leaving like that is. He'll only attract more problems in his state. John replies, saying the doctor shouldn't worry about him. The doctor responds, saying he's there to reduce injuries, and the only thing John will accomplish by leaving is causing him more trouble. The doctor finishes, telling him to sit down and rest if he has any respect for him. John reluctantly agrees. However, before sitting, he aggressively bumps into the doctor's shoulder. The doctor watches him, wondering why John is doing all of this to himself. John finally leaves the infirmary, looking all beaten up. Suddenly, he's pushed from behind, causing all of his papers to fall. He doesn't even try to respond. He just picks up his papers as the girls who pushed him call him a loser. Coincidentally, Blake and Remy are walking in the same aisle. Remy notices John and recognizes him as Serafina's friend. She also sees that John is covered in bruises. Remy approaches him and offers to help pick up his papers. Upon hearing Remy's offer, John's memories resurface, and he sees the green-haired girl instead of Remy. John snaps, yelling at Remy and swatting her hand away. Remy steps back, completely surprised by John's sudden shift in attitude. John is boiling with fury, but slowly he starts to realize what he just did to Remy. He mutters, trying to offer an apology. However, Blake shoots a laser before John can say anything. Blake approaches him, asking for a good reason not to destroy him right there. John tries to explain himself, saying he mistook Remy for someone else. Blake doesn't buy the explanation, but before he can do anything, Remy stops him, saying everything's fine and they should just let it go. They both leave, while John continues picking up his papers. Around him, everyone insults him, calling him a moron for pissing off the Queen and the Jack. John thinks about how he really admired the hero of Unordinary for seeing value in everyone, but now he finally snaps, calling the message of the book a lie. He now believes that none of them are worth anything. Back at John's house, Sarah is asking why he didn't text back. He explains that he got into a fight and his phone broke. Through the webcam, Sarah notices John's expression. She tries to cheer him up, telling him that phones are replaceable and he shouldn't let it get him down. She changes the topic, asking if he made any progress in Angry Pigs. John finally changes his serious expression, mentioning that he actually managed to beat some levels. This change draws a smile from Sarah. Back at Sarah's house, Sarah's mom finally arrives from her business trip. Upon arriving, she asks her servant how Serafina behaved during her absence. The servant replies that Serafina has changed her behavior. She spends all day locked in her room, only leaving for meals. The servant adds that she probably spends her time either playing video games or chatting with boys. Sarah is in her room, checking her laptop. She's having connection issues with a video game. She leaves her laptop and stands up to check if there's any problem with the router. But upon opening her door, she meets her mom outside. Her mom asks her to give her the phone and scolds her for wasting her time socializing and playing video games. She adds that Sarah is starting to behave like the disgrace of her sister. Sarah replies, mentioning that Layla never did anything wrong. That's the same name as the doctor's partner. Sarah's mom asks for the phone once more, and Sarah reluctantly obeys. Her mom finishes by saying that she turned off the Wi-Fi so Sarah could spend time thinking about her behavior without distractions. This annoys Sarah, since now she won't be able to talk with John. Back at John's house, he arrives tired and full of bruises from school. He immediately turns on his laptop, but notices that Sarah is offline. He decides to play some more Angry Pigs while he waits for Sarah. After a few failed attempts at the game, he notices that Sarah is still offline and wonders where she could be. At Wellston School, John is walking with his lunch on a tray. Suddenly, a bully calls him from behind, ready to make him lose all his food. John doesn't flinch and responds with an elbow to the bully's face. The bully looks defeated, his eyes starting to well up with tears, his nose probably broken. John glances at him with a stern expression, saying that he's not in the mood for his crap. John goes upstairs, leaving the bully on the floor. Upon opening the rooftop door, he notices that he's not alone. Arlo is standing there, likely waiting for John. John asks him what he's doing on the rooftop. Arlo glances at John's expression and notices that it's the same one from the picture Ison gave him from 2 years ago. Arlo replies, saying that he should be the one asking John the same thing. After all, the rooftop is an area only for royals, not commoners like him. John ignores his explanation, remarking that this is where he eats his lunch. He moves forward, ignoring Arlo's presence, and sits next to him. Arlo pretends to act patient, saying that John probably didn't hear him. However, John remarks again that that's where he sits. Arlo starts getting pissed at John's behavior and asks him if he's not afraid. John replies, mentioning that he sees no reason to be afraid. Arlo only laughs, mentioning that he could kick his ass in an instant. John agrees with Arlo but knows that he won't do anything. Curious, Arlo asks why he thinks that, to which John responds that only pathetic low tiers would go after a cripple. John adds that a king wouldn't gain anything from the encounter, but Arlo cuts him off with a single word: satisfaction. John proceeds to explain that there's no satisfaction in beating people much weaker than you. Arlo is surprised. How would someone like John know about that, unless he had some experience? Arlo bends down to get to John's level and tells him that there's someone completely useless, yet he talks back to him and dares to walk and sit in his place. He asks John, face to face, if you were king, what would you do about someone who's really ticking you off? John answers, saying that he should be grateful, surprising Arlo. He continues, saying that Arlo must be doing a great job since there's only one person he cannot keep in line. After all, a king is nothing if his subjects refuse to follow him. John stands after finishing his food and leaves. Arlo stays there, confused because he had no idea what John was talking about. Arlo thinks that only people who have stood at the top have that kind of confidence. He's now intrigued by the kind of person John was at his previous school. Back at Serafina's house, she's resting, lying on the bed until one servant approaches her. The servant tells her that the break is over and she has to return to her duties. Sarah sits on the bed and asks the servant what the book mountain is for. The servant answers that Sarah's parents want her to read through all of them and write a report by the end of the day. Sarah is annoyed, replying that she did the same thing last night. However, there's nothing the servant can do since those are the orders from Sarah's parents. Sarah is writing her essay, and she does not look happy. She remembers the last time she willingly worked so hard was a year ago. Slowly, exhaustion wins, and Sarah falls asleep. We go 1 year into the past. Sarah is thinking about why she behaved so aggressively toward the cripple. She wonders if John had anything that sparked that behavior. The teacher starts speaking and explains that there will be a project in pairs. Suddenly, the door of the classroom opens loudly, cutting off the teacher's speech. John apologizes and shows the teacher proof that he was in the infirmary. John approaches his seat, throwing an angry gaze towards Sarah. The teacher continues, explaining that each pair will have to make a presentation for each of the 3 books they will read. The teacher starts forming the pairs, and in an unexpected turn of events, she pairs John and Serafina together. This surprises them, but not in a good way. Now they are sitting together with gloomy expressions on their faces. Sarah tells John to move his elbow off her table, but John refuses. Before she can even start a threat, John cuts her off, saying that if she beats him up, he won't be able to help with the project. Sarah corrects him, mentioning that he won't touch the project. She continues, explaining that she will do the entire thing by herself, and at the end, she will give John some note cards for the presentation. John refuses to follow the plan. He argues that he went all the way to Wellston to learn. However, Sarah ignores John's words and stands up, cutting off his argument. She imposes her decision over John using her heavy presence. Without adding anything, she leaves the classroom while John looks at her with frustration. Sarah works diligently on the project while John dozes off and falls asleep on his desk. On the day of the presentation, Sarah approaches John and shows him the note cards. She tells him that he only needs to read them and follow her cues. John ignores her, and upon receiving the cards, he tears them. This exalts Sarah, who wonders what in the world he's doing. John tells her again that he came to Wellston to learn and not waste his time. He adds that since there was no communication between them, he made the whole project too, and so her notes are useless. He finishes by saying that they should at least try to figure out what to say during the presentation, to which Sarah reacts with anger. The teacher starts the class and tells everyone to get ready for the presentations. John and Sarah stand in front of the class, explaining the plot of a book called Hamlet. So far, everything goes smoothly, and now she gives John his turn to talk. She will give him one and only one opportunity. John starts giving more details about the book with confidence in his words. However, Sarah starts hearing things that are completely different from the actual plot. Sarah, frustrated, wonders if John even managed to read the latter half of the book. Sarah finally receives her grades, a B-. For her, that grade is a low blow to her image. But on the contrary, for John, it's a reason to celebrate. Sarah stands from her seat, and the teacher asks where she's going. Sarah replies, "The library," while John watches her, wondering what's with her attitude. After class, John walks down an aisle and starts hearing the opinions of other students about Sarah. Practically all of them make fun of her for getting a B-, even adding that she's a disappointment. John listens attentively, thinking that even someone like Sarah has to go through these kinds of things. In the library, Sarah is checking some books until someone calls her. She lifts her gaze, only to find John. He asks her to work together this time so they do better in the next presentation. She aggressively stands from her chair and forces John against a wall. She tries to intimidate him, saying that if he doesn't follow her order to just read the note cards, she will send him to the infirmary every single day, giving him no chance to work on his project. John asks her if it's really worth going that far just for a perfect grade, to which she affirms. John asks again if she likes doing all the extra work by herself. He adds, wondering if the actual reason for her behavior is that she's constantly trying to impress people. This hits a nerve in Sarah, and she answers, saying that her attitude is none of his business. John strikes back, saying that he will continue doing his part of the presentation, and if he ends up wounded, she can consider the whole project a failure. Sarah does not hold back and promises to make John's life into a nightmare. With a sarcastic expression, John mentions that he's a cripple and there's nothing she can do to make his life more miserable. Sarah continues, stating that if John had followed her plan, they would have gotten an A without having to talk to each other. She's still furious, seeking an explanation for why he doesn't listen to what she says. "Because I don't want to," John replies, surprising Sarah. He adds that others' opinions mean nothing to him, even as a cripple. That is because before going to Wellston, John had already decided that he would live his life the way he wants. Sarah is shocked upon hearing John's answer, still with an angry expression all over her face. It is already night at the Wellston dormitories. Sarah lays on her bed, unable to sleep. Her thoughts kept circling back to John's words about whether all her effort was worth it just for grades and the approval of others. The idea that he could ignore others' opinions and live however he wanted struck her as absurd, almost delusional. The next day, Sarah went to the library to pick up some books. When she reached her usual table, she found John sitting there, working. Annoyed, she asked him why he was there, and he replied that he was working on the project. Sarah reminded him that he wasn't supposed to be doing anything, which only irritated him further. He insisted that he would do his part of the work regardless of her opinion. With reluctance, Sarah sat down, both of them silently resenting their partnership. As John finished a section of his work, Sarah requested to review it, arguing that it was reasonable given that they were supposed to be working together. John initially refused, but Sarah swiftly took the paper from him. Reading through it, she found several inaccuracies and questioned what was wrong with him. John defended himself by blaming the difficult language of the book, and Sarah told him to consult her if he had doubts instead of improvising again. They continued working on the project, but John eventually dozed off. Sarah slammed a book against the table, startling him awake, and ordered him to keep working, much to his frustration. After their second presentation, Sarah glared at her grades in disbelief. It was an A-, which felt like another failure to her. She couldn't understand why she kept falling short. In contrast, John was thrilled. Approaching Sarah, he celebrated their success, only for her to correct him coldly. She pointed out that the minus meant they had failed to meet expectations. Annoyed, John asked why she couldn't be satisfied with a good grade, but she ignored him, walking away and telling him not to speak to her again. As Sarah wandered through an aisle, she overheard laughter from nearby. Peering around a corner, she saw John being bullied by two girls. He was injured but still told them to stop gossiping and focus on themselves. One of the girls revealed they had been talking about Sarah, mocking her for her recent grades and calling her an embarrassment. Sarah froze in shock as she listened, but to her surprise, John defended her, stating that her dedication and hard work were undeniable. The bully responded by shoving John against the wall, mocking him for thinking his opinion mattered. Before things escalated further, Sarah stepped in. She grabbed the bully's face and slammed it against the wall, leaving John stunned. Holding the bully in place, Sarah turned her attention to the second girl, who immediately began to tremble. Terrified, the girl fled, abandoning her partner. The remaining bully turned to confront Sarah but stopped in fear upon recognizing her. Sarah demanded to know why she thought she could attack John and speak about her that way. The bully stammered an apology, claiming it was just a joke. Sarah ordered her to leave, and the girl ran off without hesitation. Once they were alone, John thanked Sarah. She dismissed his gratitude and stated they needed to start working on their third presentation. John, smiling weakly, responded that he would join her after a visit to the infirmary. Back in the library, John and Sarah were working on their project. Suddenly, John asked Sarah to help him understand a section of the text. Sarah smirked, mocking him, saying she never expected him to swallow his pride and ask for help. Despite her teasing, she began explaining the content of the book while John listened carefully. She found herself surprised by his attentiveness, as he had been uncharacteristically diligent over the last few days. The day of the final presentation arrived. Before it began, the teacher asked the groups to have a brief discussion. Sarah noticed John's worried expression and couldn't resist teasing him. She joked that he would drill a hole in the floor if he kept staring like that. John admitted that he truly wanted to do his best this time. He explained that he disliked what people said about Serafina and didn't want to drag her down any longer. Sarah responded curtly, telling him it was a little late to be worrying about that. When John apologized, she brushed it off, telling him to forget about the past and focus on the present. When it was their turn, Sarah stood and made an unexpected remark to John. She told him that he had been the most persistent partner she had ever worked with. Her comment caught John off guard, but brought a smile to his face. The presentation went smoothly, far better than their previous 2 attempts. Afterward, Sarah received her grade, a solid A. She finally felt at ease, though she refrained from celebrating. Approaching John, she noticed the joy radiating from his face. John, unable to contain his excitement, jumped out of his seat, celebrating their achievement. He enthusiastically told Sarah that she must be happy about her grade now. Then, with a grin, he invited her to celebrate with drinks on him. Sarah maintained her stoic demeanor, reminding him that his average grade was still an A-. John disagreed, arguing that they had worked hard for this and deserved a reward. Sarah initially refused, stating that she would rather spend time in the library. However, John was relentless and eventually convinced her to join him. They ended up at a boba tea shop. As they sipped their drinks, they both found themselves genuinely enjoying the moment. Though Sarah didn't show it outwardly, she too wanted to celebrate. She silently thanked John for teaching her to focus on what made her happy. Back in the present, Sarah was asleep at her desk. A servant entered the room, waking her up. The servant informed her that she was there to collect her work. Sarah groggily replied that it wasn't finished yet. The servant then mentioned that Sarah's father had arranged an internship interview for her at NXGen Research Facility. The interview was scheduled for the next day, and the servant advised her to research the company beforehand. Sarah sighed, commenting on how short the notice was. The servant, unimpressed, questioned whether her time away from home had made her soft, noting that she had been complaining more about her responsibilities. Before leaving, the servant reminded her to work more efficiently. Sarah stayed at her desk, staring at her unfinished essay with a sense of frustration and helplessness. John walked home, weighed down by the monotony of his routine. Wake up, go to school, get beaten up, and come back with nothing to look forward to. He couldn't help but wonder why he had to endure it all, questioning the point of the endless cycle. When he arrived home, he let his jacket and bag fall to the floor without a second thought. Frustration boiled over, and he lashed out with a powerful kick at the punching bag in the corner. The bag swayed violently, but it wasn't enough. He began throwing punch after punch, venting his anger on the worn leather. Everyone felt worthless to him. The weaklings who couldn't stand up for themselves and the so-called elites who only used their power for selfish and petty reasons. He was sick of people who thought they could do whatever they wanted simply because they had power. The image of the green-haired girl flashed in his mind. Someone he had once believed in, and now even she seemed like a disappointment. His strikes intensified, fists slamming into the bag until his knuckles burned. His breath came in raged gasps as he came to the bitter conclusion that everyone around him was worthless. But then a memory of Sarah surfaced, interrupting the storm inside him. Her image lingered in his mind and he began to relax, the anger dissipating as quickly as it had surged. His hands were raw and bloodied, trembling from the effort, and he finally collapsed onto the floor. Eventually, he sat up and turned to his laptop, scanning the screen for any sign of Sarah. She was still offline, and the silence gnawed at him. It had been a week since he'd last heard from her. He noticed that his dad was online and decided to call. His dad was surprised to hear from him through the laptop, and John explained he had broken his phone in an accident on the stairs. His dad brushed it off, promising to send him money for a new one. John shifted the topic, asking if his dad could send him another copy of Unordinary, but his dad's tone grew serious. He explained that the editor had destroyed all the copies for his own safety. Concerned, his dad asked if everything was all right, but John quickly dismissed the question, claiming he had a lot of homework and ending the call before his dad could say goodbye. When his dad called back, John ignored it and closed his laptop. Back at school, Eason was keeping an eye on John, unsure of what Arlo was planning but recognizing that it was working. Slowly but surely, John's true colors were beginning to emerge. We are now at the headmaster's office. A blonde guy is knocking on the door and the headmaster invites him in. This guy, called Keen, is the head of security at Wellston. The headmaster invites him to sit and watch the news. The news is talking again about the group Ember. A new body has been found with its mark, and this time, it's in the town of Wellston. The headmaster asks Keen what he thinks about these news reports. Keen answers that it is frightening to see high tiers being murdered. He adds that it is pretty hard to understand Ember's objective. The headmaster asks him if he remembers Ray, the former king of Wellston. Of course, Keen remembers. Ray was a brilliant student with immense potential and a powerful electricity ability. The headmaster reveals that Ray was murdered by Ember a month ago, leaving Keen perplexed. He does not understand how that was possible. The headmaster explains that it might be linked to the fact that Ray got his hands on a copy of Unordinary. Keen is still shocked, considering that Ember must have strong members capable of taking down high tiers like Ray. The headmaster instructs Keen to monitor everyone entering the school until the situation with Ember is resolved. He adds that, combined with the reason behind Seraphina's suspension, Wellston now has 2 incidents related to Unordinary. This means the authorities will be keeping a close eye on them. The headmaster continues, asking Keen to bring any suspicious individuals to him for questioning. He also requests that Keen try to keep the authorities away from the school's internal matters. In another part of the school, a blue-haired guy is walking down the aisle. He spots Eisen and immediately hides, wondering what Eisen is doing. Around the corner, Eisen is watching a scene between John and 4 bullies. One of the bullies is pushing John against the wall. John asks him to stop touching him, making the bully and his crew laugh. The bully reminds John that he's the strongest there, so he can do whatever he wants. As he says this, the bully lunges at John with a jab. John swiftly evades the hit and grabs the bully's arm. Using the bully's momentum, John brings him to the floor, applying pressure on his elbow from behind. John, tired of the bullying, yells at him, telling him to never touch him again. While yelling, John increases the force on the bully's elbow, breaking it. The bully's 3 partners launch themselves at John, using their abilities. John stands his ground, ready for the impact. His eyes begin to release a yellow glow, revealing that John actually has an ability. John stands up, his eyes still glowing yellow. Suddenly, his mind recreates a similar scene from his past. He sees himself at his previous school, surrounded by defeated guys. Among them is a green-haired girl looking completely defeated in the background. A younger John stands triumphant in a deserted area, facing the green-haired girl. He tells her if she really thought he would be defeated just because she gathered a bunch of weaklings. John calls her Claire and adds that he expected more foresight from her. Apparently, Claire had known long before they met that John would become king of the school. She looks at John with fury, but he continues speaking. He asks if the only reason she helped him was to improve her position. Claire remains silent, breaking John's patience. He grabs her by the hair, demanding an answer. He asks why she made everyone turn against him. Claire yells back, telling John to look at himself. John looks confused, and Claire seizes the moment to free herself from his grasp. She slaps him hard across the face. Yelling at him, she tells him to take a good look at the kind of monster he has become. She says he only looks for reasons to hurt people and cares for no one but himself. Claire calls him a tyrant and a hypocrite, declaring that he does not deserve the power he has. She wishes she had never helped or met him. This breaks John, and he yells at her to shut up. Claire defies him, daring him to silence her with violence, just like he did with everyone else. John grabs her shirt and prepares to punch her, screaming at her in rage. But before the impact, he notices her expression. Her face is filled with fury and deep disappointment. Claire calls him a monster before falling unconscious from his punch. John snaps back to the present. His body relaxes, and he decides not to use his ability. Once again, he remembers Claire's voice calling him a monster. By the look on his face, it is clear that this memory has left a wound he still cannot heal. The bullies are still rushing at John, and one of the girls launches the first attack. John manages to block it, but his arm is on the verge of giving out. Using his other arm, he throws a direct punch to the girl's stomach. The other guy launches energy missiles, but John dodges them. He tries to formulate a plan to escape, and concludes that the best way is to take down the guy blocking the exit. Before he can act, the second girl approaches from behind and lands a hit on John's neck. The first bully follows up with a punch using his fully healed arm. From above, the first girl joins her hands and delivers a devastating attack to John's back. He collapses to the floor, bleeding, but the bullies don't stop. The first girl grabs John's head while the first bully prepares to continue the beating. The bully starts lecturing John, but John begins to lose consciousness and doesn't hear anything he says. This enrages the girl holding John's head, and she prepares to hit him again. Just as her punch is about to land, a barrier appears, reflecting the damage. Her arm bleeds heavily from the backlash. The second girl rushes over, asking what happened. She freezes upon realizing that her friend was stopped by Arlo's barrier. Arlo stands nearby, silently observing the scene. He approaches John while the bullies stammer, trying to explain themselves. Without a word, Arlo traps the bully leader in a barrier. The barrier starts shrinking, forcing the bully to bend over to avoid being crushed. Arlo places a foot on him and demands, "Who gave you permission to talk?" He then helps John to his feet. As they walk away, Arlo mentions noticing John's glowing eyes. He wonders why John prefers to be beaten, instead of using his power to fight back. We are now at the infirmary. Arlo is sitting next to John's bed, reading the school newspaper. He's focused on an article written by Ison about Ember. Arlo waits patiently for John to wake up. Meanwhile, John seems to be having a nightmare about his past. In his dream, young John is sitting on the rooftop of his previous school. Suddenly, a blonde guy named Adrian approaches him, visibly scared. Adrian stutters nervously, struggling to speak. John grabs him and demands he get to the point. Adrian says there's an issue with Claire. He overheard her talking to the Jack about her true motives for approaching John when he was still weak. Apparently, she only wanted John to rely on her blindly once he reached the top. John doesn't believe a word and smacks Adrian, calling him a liar. He refuses to accept that everything he experienced with Claire could be a lie. Adrian insists that Claire has been using him all along and is now gathering people to dethrone him. John hits him again and yells at him to shut up. He dismisses Adrian's words as nonsense and says they carry no weight compared to Claire's. Adrian doesn't back down, and he tells John that his ego is blinding him. Adrian warns that if John doesn't open his eyes to what's happening, he'll lose everything. John laughs mockingly and asks if Adrian has forgotten how powerful he is. He yells, declaring he will never lose because everyone else is trash. John abruptly wakes up in the infirmary. Upon seeing Arlo, he immediately throws a punch at him. However, Arlo doesn't flinch, as if John's punch had no effect. John grabs Arlo's shirt in frustration. Irritated, he demands to know why Arlo helped him and what he's planning. Arlo remains stoic and reminds John that not everything revolves around him. He advises John to wake up from his delusional world and remember who he just hit. Arlo warns John that he's lucky he's patient. Standing in front of him, Arlo coldly states that he deeply despises people who refuse to learn their place. He adds that if John ever touches him again, he won't be so lenient. Arlo leaves the infirmary, and John stays behind. He sits there, questioning the point of everything he's doing. Arlo leaves the infirmary and his phone buzzes. It's a mysterious message that says that Ison has been following him. In another aisle, Ison is trying to process the scene he just saw. He saw the glow in John's eyes and Arlo saving him, so probably he also knows about it. Out of nowhere, Arlo appears just around the corner, surprising Ison, who gets ready to escape. However, Arlo calls him, saying that he's the person he was looking for. Arlo tells Ison that he knows that he's still spying on John. Ison tries to deny it, but Arlo cuts him off, saying that he can't hide it from him. After all, Ison is doing all of that because he wants a top story for the newspaper. Arlo then offers him a deal. Serafina comes back in 2 weeks, and Ison will have that time to make his article and keep Arlo informed about everything he discovers. If he accomplishes it, Arlo guarantees him the front-page article of the school's newspaper. Upon hearing that, Ison happily agrees. But when Arlo leaves, he realizes the kind of job he just accepted. In the Wellston boys' dormitories, Ison is looking for more info about John on his laptop. He finally gets a huge discovery, John's transcript from his old school. He's about to check its contents, but suddenly Blake appears behind him, congratulating him for the top story in the newspaper. Eason gets scared, immediately covering the screen of his laptop to hide his research. However, Blake spots John's face on the screen and asks Eisen why he is so obsessed with John. He adds that he's a lunatic since Remy tried to help him, but he yelled and slapped her. Blake says that instead of worrying about John, Eisen should spend more time with Remy. After all, since Ray passed away, Remy has not been the same. Eisen proposes to take Remy out to the mall or something to relax her mind. Blake thinks it's a good idea and will tell Remy and leaves, mentioning that Eisen better not bail them this time. Eisen resumes his research, but his expression changes when he reads about John's power and level. He now understands how John got into Wellston and his high level of confidence. The report says that John was expelled from New Boston 2 years ago, but Eisen recalls that John got into Wellston last year, and now he wonders what John did during that year in between. Eisen now starts reading the reason behind John's expulsion. Excessive violence, it says. Upon checking more details, Eisen can't believe what he's reading. Apparently, John was able to single-handedly take down half his class for an unexplained reason. Eisen gets nervous. John is not someone to mess with and wonders what would happen if they expose him. Back to the rooftop of the school, we find Arlo. Suddenly, John opens the door and enters. Arlo mentions that he must be very brave to appear here again. John apologizes and mentions that he really wanted to talk with him. John promises that it won't take long. Arlo allows him to stay and asks him what he wants. Before John answers, he prepares to sit, but Arlo stops him, saying that he better hurry and say what he needs to say. John starts by thanking Arlo for saving him earlier and apologizes for punching him after waking up. Arlo asks if he came all the way up there to waste his time with a corny speech. John says that he didn't want Arlo to get the wrong idea. He appreciates the fact that a person helps someone like him. Arlo clarifies that he didn't help John because he wanted a new best friend. Instead, he hates people breaking the hierarchy. He considers that 4 people against only 1 guy is not how order works, and it should be a fair one-on-one. After all, if John had fought each one of the bullies separately, he would have a chance to win. John dismisses it, saying that Arlo is giving too much credit to a cripple like him. John finishes, saying that's all he wanted to say, and hurries off. Arlo thinks that John is a liar, and the fact that he oversells himself as a cripple makes him wonder why he's denying his place. It looks like John is trying to convince himself that he's completely powerless. In another part of the school, Eisen is reviewing the information about John's expulsion. He concludes that it was not because he took down half his class, but because the school was not able to control him. Eisen thinks that it's better to leave John minding his business, and the best way to do so is to make Arlo forget about it. Suddenly, Arlo's hand appears on his shoulder, scaring Eisen. He tries to escape, saying that he's busy, but Arlo creates a barrier blocking his way. Arlo tells him to not even think about running, and that there must be a good reason for ignoring his calls. Eisen says that he was not able to find anything, but Arlo does not buy it. Arlo knows that someone able to get information about the Ember organization wouldn't fail at finding basic information about one of his classmates. Being too good at your job was your ruin, dude. Arlo tells him to reveal the information if he still wants a successful story. However, Eisen says that he'll drop the story, surprising Arlo. Eisen reveals that the best course of action is to wait for Serafina to return and to pretend that his investigation never happened. He continues, saying that everything is good the way it is. However, Arlo replies that John is not in his rightful place. Without thinking, Eisen replies that it's not Arlo's business. Arlo smacks Eisen against the barrier and reminds him that he decides everything at school and demands Eisen to reveal everything. Even in that situation, Eisen does not reveal anything. He's afraid of what John could do if Arlo tries to force him. Arlo releases him, surprising Eisen. However, Arlo says that all his time won't go to waste and he personally will get to the bottom of this. Arlo leaves, ignoring Eisen's warnings, and his begs for him to stop since he's not aware of what he's dragging everyone into. John is walking down the aisle of the school, remembering Arlo's words about being able to win against the bullies. He looks thoughtful but thinks he doesn't want to get involved in hierarchy. He never wants to go back to that time, where hierarchy only brought pain and anger to his life. John keeps walking, and in the corner, he crashes again with Arlo dropping his papers. Arlo doesn't even get surprised. At this point, he's used to that. John bends down to pick up his papers, and Arlo watches him from above, angry for seeing John acting so pathetic even with the potential of a high tier. Arlo drops a binder to the floor and tells him to use it to avoid embarrassing himself every time he bumps into someone. Arlo is about to leave, but John tells him that he just can't take his stuff. Arlo gets even angrier, but just tells him to keep the binder. John insists that he has to pay him in some way and asks him if he's free after school. They end up going to the same boba store that John and Sarah frequent. John asks if Arlo has ever had boba, to which he replies with a no. John then advises him to order a mango boba, and Arlo agrees. The waitress arrives and asks them for their order. Arlo starts by ordering a large coffee, surprising John since there's no point in ordering coffee in a boba store. John then tells the waitress to bring 2 mango drinks instead, but Arlo refuses and orders his coffee again. John insists again, saying he's the one paying. However, Arlo does not care and orders a coffee on a separate tab. On the TV, the news are talking about NX Gen Research, the company that interviewed Sarah. They explain that it is a lab where they research the root of their abilities, and a huge secret project was put on hold. Back at the table, Arlo is drinking his coffee, and John is by him, not wanting to taste the boba drink. John tells Arlo that he reminds him a lot of Sarah when they first met. Arlo asks him how he ended up being so close with Sarah. John starts saying that they hated each other at first because she beat him up, and then started talking and hanging out due to being stuck together on a project. At the end, she saved him from some bullies, and their friendship slowly began. Arlo then asks him where he learned to fight, since not many low tiers are able to go against mid tiers. John replies that his dad taught him as long as he can remember since he wanted his son to be able to defend himself. Arlo asks if John's dad is also a cripple, and he confirms. John adds that he's very proud of his dad, even with people looking down on him. He's able to do his best with what he has. John then asks if Arlo has someone he looks up to. Arlo answers, saying Ray, his predecessor as king. Arlo says that he didn't agree with the way he managed things, but despite that, it was hard to dislike him since he was really good at recognizing people's talents and was extremely powerful. He finishes by saying that if he were alive, he wouldn't know who is stronger. John does not understand what he means by that, but Arlo stands up. He leaves the money for the coffee on the table and leaves, saying that he has some things to take care of. Before leaving, John insists one last time for him to take the mango drink with him. In Serafina's house, she's working on her daily book report. However, at this point, she's tired of doing that and throws the book with fury. Without noticing, the servant appears to inform her that NX Gen turned down Sarah's application. The servant adds that Sarah's father is very displeased and wants her to try harder next time. Back at the Wellston dorms, Blake and Ison are waiting for Remy. Apparently, they are planning to go to the cinema, but Blake, upon seeing the tickets, tells Ison he should have picked an action movie instead. Ison says that he's wrong since girls are into romantic stuff. Suddenly, Remy calls them from behind and says that she's ready to go to the mall. In a store, Ison is having an internal argument about which pen to choose, one with a gel grip or with a titanium grip. In the background, Remy is playing with a ball and suddenly launches one at Blake's face, imitating his attacks. They start a ball war while Ison takes an eternity to choose the pen. Tired of waiting, they throw a ball at Ison's head, telling him that it's getting late for the movie. In the cinema, the three are watching the movie, invested in its development to the point of releasing tears. After the movie, Ison mocks Blake, saying that despite not wanting to see the movie, he ended up crying. Suddenly, Blake spots an ability gauge booth, the same one where Sarah and John went. Knowing that Remy has a level higher than 5, they decide to make her participate. Ison practically drags Remy to the booth and Blake pays, telling the vendor to measure Remy's ability. Remy says that she already knows her level, and Ison replies that it's a guaranteed prize then. The vendor tells Remy not to worry, and he starts measuring her powers. The vendor gets surprised. Remy is very powerful for getting a 5. The vendor looks for a prize and gives her exactly the same teddy bear that Sarah received some time ago. Upon seeing the bear, Remy gets nervous and grabs the bear. After opening the bear, she takes out the tracking chip. This puts Blake and Ison on alert, including the vendor. They don't look happy, and Remy asks what the meaning behind the chip is. The vendor tries to calm the situation, mentioning that he's as surprised as they are and he's only giving the prizes his boss gave him. While grabbing the vendor's arm, Ison activates his ability. It is some sort of scan ability that allows him to check the pulse of the vendor. By his heart rate, Ison concludes that the vendor is lying. Ison hardens his grip, telling the vendor that he'll have to come with them. With no way to escape, the vendor drops a gas bomb, filling the area with a thick cloud of smoke. In the middle of the smoke, a guy with an invisibility power approaches the vendor from behind, making him also invisible. Remy tells Blake to get rid of the smoke. Blake charges energy balls on his hands and collides them, making an expansion wave that disperses the smoke. Upon checking the booth, they notice that the vendor is gone. However, they don't worry since Aizen's ability also allows him to lock people's positions. With that, he's able to spot the vendor even if he's invisible and tells Remy where the vendor is heading. They rush to the exit, making a lot of fuss and alerting one of the mall guards. Upon seeing them, the guard mistakenly thinks that Blake, Remy, and Aizen were the ones that set off the bomb and calls for reinforcements. Outside of the mall, they spot the vendor on a motorcycle still being invisible. Aizen rushes to follow them, but doesn't notice that a truck is about to hit him. Thankfully, he's able to stop the car with his ability. Blake gets over the truck while mocking Aizen for not looking both sides while crossing the street. Then Blake yells at Remy, telling her that he'll back her up. Remy uses her electricity power to increase her speed and follows the bike. However, when Blake is about to make the shot, one of the guards stops them, making them unable to continue the chase. Remy is approaching the bike but wonders why Blake hasn't shot an energy beam yet. Eventually, Remy's range reaches the bike, and she uses her electricity to stop it. The two riders crash to the floor, clearly injured. When Remy is about to get close to start the interrogation, a female guard launches at Remy out of nowhere. However, Remy was covering her body with electricity and unintentionally ends up zapping the guard, making her unconscious. When Remy turns to check on the riders of the bike, she doesn't find them. Remy decides to concentrate to feel any of their electronics. However, the guard grabs Remy's leg with the little force she has left, making a complete halt to the chase. In the security room of the mall, we see the female guard escorting Remy using handcuffs. Aizen and Blake are already there, trying to explain to the other guard what actually happened. Blake tells the guard to check the camera footage from earlier to verify that they are not lying. The guard adds that the vendor always gave him bad vibes. But honestly, the guard only started to listen to them after he discovered that they were students from Wellston. The guard says that he'll check the cameras, but they better not do anything funny. However, upon turning, Blake and Aizen disobey his orders. While they wait, Aizen mentions that he could easily get free from the cuffs, but Blake cuts him off, not wanting to get into more trouble. Remy says that the cuffs were not designed for people like them, and Aizen asks, "What's the point then?" Remy continues, asking them why they let the guards catch them if they were stronger. Aizen replies that he didn't want to get into trouble, and Blake says that the authorities were backing the guards. Remy says that that's the point. The cuffs are for mid-tiers, but for people like them, they act as a reminder that there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. They might be strong, but the authorities will always stop them. In the camera room, the guard is checking the footage. The students were not lying, but due to the smoke, the camera did not record much. However, at the booth, they notice a hooded man picking up the teddy bears and taking them out of the mall. The guard tries to follow him, but the hooded man managed to avoid all the cameras while leaving. Back to the security room, Remy tells the guys that she accidentally zapped the female guard, and she had to help her cuff herself. She starts daydreaming about how many guards it would have taken to stop her if she wanted to keep chasing the vendor. However, Remy stops, and her attitude changes. She tells them that she's been thinking about how the authorities would deal with powerful people like Sarah or Arlo if they decided to challenge them. For her, it wouldn't be logical to let people that powerful roam free without some kind of condition. She suspects that they actually don't have as much freedom as they think. Blake dismisses it, saying that they can do whatever they want at school, even not going to classes. However, Remy says that that's the case, but they also seem very obsessive. For example, Sarah and her obsession with perfection, and Arlo with his obsession for order. They are so invested in their responsibilities that the idea of defying the authorities never crosses their mind. Remy adds that it looks like they've been crippled. This automatically makes Aizen remember John's past and his change of attitude. Aizen then adds that it sounds logical. After all, the authorities need a reliable way to keep strong people in line. Blake is still not sure and asks about the superheroes not being targeted by the authorities. Aizen calls him dumb for not being aware of the recent news. Aizen explains that those superheroes don't act according to the authorities' wishes, and out of nowhere, a group called Ember appears and starts killing them. Blake gets shocked but still finds it hard to believe, despite Aizen saying that there is no choice but to get rid of a threat that can't be controlled. Aizen turns to Remy, revealing that she asked him to write an article about Ember for the front page of the school's newspaper. Remy wanted the students to be more wary about Ember's existence and to slowly introduce the idea that Ember and the authorities are connected. Suddenly, the guard appears telling them that the three are clear. However, the case was escalated to the authorities, so they need them to give an official statement, which annoys them. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video and don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.